guys, and welcome back to Reading Club. So today I'm going to read you a new book. It's called Time Chronicles, Fire in the Dark. Time Chronicles, Fire in the Dark. Chapter 1. No one was in the mood for a madman. It was just too hot. Plague! Fire! Famine! The madman shouted as he strode back and forth through the crowds of people on the bridge. "'Tis 1666 and London is doomed!" The madman grabbed at passers-by. He had to tell someone, but they always pushed him away. If only someone would listen. But no one would. On the side of the bridge, a dark man stood still, staring out at the river. Maybe he will listen, thought the madman. He weaved his way through the crowd, crying, "The end of the world is now!" Even when the madman stopped next to him, the dark man didn't move. He continued to stare out from the bridge. What was he looking at? The madman squinted in the bright sunshine. Some way down the river were two tall ships. Their proud masts shimmered in the hazy heat. They were Royal Navy warships. The dark man seemed to be studying them closely. On the decks of both ships, sailors were busy preparing to go to sea. The madman tugged at the man's sleeve. "You see, last year was the plague. This year we are at war. The end of the world is coming, I tell you." Slowly, the dark man turned his head and stared into the madman's eyes. The madman felt as if his heart had stopped. The dark man smiled. "Yes, the end of the world is coming," he whispered. The madman couldn't believe what he had seen in the other man's eyes. A darkness so terrifying that it sent the madman stumbling away. A violent darkness. The Viren hadn't wanted to reveal himself to anyone. He wasn't ready for that, yet. But then, what did it matter? No one would believe a madman. The Viren turned back and studied the two ships. He needed to smuggle something on board. That was his deadly task, but how, when the ships were so heavily guarded? Chapter 2. The madman stumbled through the crowds. He crashed heavily against a handcart loaded with sacks of flour. It had just come from the mill at the end of the bridge. The man pushing the cart shouted at him, "Kindly stand aside, I am in a hurry." "I've seen the darkness!" cried the madman. The man driving the cart glanced quickly at the two warships downstream. "I don't have time for this," he muttered. "I know you!" cried the madman. "You're that Mr. Royal Bread and Biscuit man. Thomas Farina, the King's baker. Supplier of bread and biscuit to His Majesty's Navy, if you please," snapped Thomas. "Though I might not be for much longer if you don't get out of my way. I have an order of biscuits that has to be finished and on board ship by tomorrow." As Thomas pushed on through the crowd, the Viren turned and followed. He had heard Thomas talking to the madman, and now he had an idea. Chapter 3. It was late by the time Thomas had finished baking. As he packed the last of the Navy's order for ship's biscuit, his concentration was broken by a noise outside. It was the night watchman walking up Pudding Lane. Thomas listened to the watchman's familiar call. "'Tis after 1. Take care of your lock, your light, and your fire, and then you are done." Wearily, Thomas raked out the glowing embers in his oven, put out the candles, and went to bed. Time passed. All was quiet in the narrow lanes and alleys. Not even the occasional chime of church bells disturbed the sleeping city. Then, out of the darkness, two figures crept into Pudding Lane. "Where are we?" Nina muttered quietly. "Wherever are we?" They paused as if waiting for an answer. Then Nina spoke again. "Oh great, I've lost contact. I can't get hold of Tyler." Most of the buildings in the lane had signs hanging from them. "If they're shops," said Nina, "maybe they'll give us a clue." But Nadim wasn't listening. He started to run. He had seen something. Halfway up the lane, one of the shop windows had started to glow with a flickering orange light. As the light grew, Nina could make out the shop's sign. It was a loaf of bread, a baker's sign. Nina, quickly, fire! Nadim was already pushing at the bakery door by the time Nina caught up with him. By chance, the door was unlocked. Nadim held his breath and pushed his way into the room. The top half of the room was filled with choking smoke. He dropped to the floor and crawled. His skin felt tight from the intense heat. "I don't think there's anyone in here," he shouted. "Then get out!" screamed Nina. "Now!" "No," shouted Nadim. "I can't just make out the fire. It hasn't spread far. I reckon I could put it out." Without waiting for an answer, Nadim looked around for something to use. To one side was a stack of crates with a heavy canvas cloth thrown over them. Written on the crates were the words H.M. Royal Navy Ship's Biscuits. With all his strength, Nadim hurled the canvas across the room and swung it up over the fire. The cloth smothered the flames in an instant. When the fire out, he staggered out into the lane, coughing. "You are an idiot!" snapped Nina. "You could have been—" Suddenly the link in her pocket started to whir. It was Tyler. Part of a download had gone through. Download from Tyler. "I repeat, danger. September 2nd, 1666, the night the Great Fire of London started. Keep clear of area known as the City. You must not change history by getting involved with the fire." Nadim gasped. "You don't think we—" Nina looked up from the link. "I do," she nodded. "I think we may have just put out the Great Fire of London before it even got started." Nadim started to panic. "What do we do now? I mean, we've changed history, which means everything changes from this point onwards. What do we do?" Moments later, another broken message arrived from Tyler. Download from Tyler. "Going on. The time web has gone crazy. It's hard to describe. Everything is blurred. It's as if the time web is trying to change its shape. You must—" "We've got no choice," said Nina. "We are going to have to restart the fire." "But we can't do that," gulped Nadim. "People can get hurt, or worse." "But who knows what terrible things might happen if history is changed forever," said Nina. "We have to put history back on course." Nina turned and went into the bakery. "We don't need virons," muttered Nadim. "We're doing a pretty good job messing up history on our own." Chapter 4. "Something isn't right," said Nina. She was standing in the doorway of the bakery. "You can say that again," mumbled Nadim. "No, seriously," whispered Nadim. Nina, can you feel it?" "Feel what?" asked Nadim. "There's just been a fire, right?" said Nina. "And outside it's a warm night." She paused. "So why is it freezing in here?" "Virons," gasped Nadim. "Maybe they started the Great Fire of London." "So what do we do now?" asked Nina. "Should we restart the fire or not?" "No, that won't be necessary," came a voice from the shadows. "You've just made my task that much easier. I would only have to put it out myself." A candle was lit at the far end of the bakery door, instead of Viren. Instantly, Nina and Nadim went for their zap traps. "Fools," sneered the Viren. "You can't use those time runner toys in here. Don't you know that? I'm too close. You'd be hit by the zap as well." He stared into their eyes. "So Mortlock is pinning his hopes on you, is he? You pathetic." Nadim and Nina's legs were locked solid. They felt dizzy with fear. How did this Viren know so much? "You have been lucky so far," continued the Viren, as he fixed them with his terrible gaze. "My congratulations, but you have interfered with our work too much." He lit another candle. "I think you'll find things are not going to be so easy from now on." The Viren's eyes held both of them. Not only could Nina not move, she was even finding it hard to think. She felt as if the Viren was looking right inside her head. It was as if he was undoing her memory. Nina decided she had to take control of her mind before the Viren did. She had to think of something, and quickly all she could think of was a stupid old nursery rhyme. London's burning, fetch the engine, fire, fire!" she chanted over and over in her head. The Viren cocked his head to one side and looked curiously at her. It was as if he could hear her thoughts. He began to laugh. No, I'm not here to burn London down. My task is much more interesting than that." He pulled forward an enormous sack. "This," he said, "is why I'm here." Nina thought she might be seeing things. The sack was moving on its own. Something inside it withered and wriggled. It was her mind playing tricks on her. The Viren opened the sack. "This is the answer," he hissed, pulling out a fistful of squirming legs, tails, black fur, teeth and claws. Rats, he laughed. Plague rats. Chapter 5. Nina felt exhausted by the Viren's draining stare, and she was fighting to stay focused. She glanced at Nadim. He seemed to be in a dream. The Viren held a couple of rats in front of Nina. "You may be wondering why I am here in this bakery," he sneered. "After all, I could release the rats anywhere in the city and the disease would spread." "Then why—" Nina managed to mutter. "Perhaps I needed to put out the fire first," smiled the Viren. "Certainly the great fire would have destroyed all my little plague carriers, but then you very kindly put it out for me." "Why, you here?" shouted Nina. The Viren wrenched open a crate of ship's biscuit. "Spreading plague in a city just seemed too easy, almost boring. No, my plan is much more interesting." He dropped some rats into the crate. "Imagine every ship in the Royal Navy out at sea." He closed the crate and opened another. "Hungry sailors call for their ship's biscuit," he laughed, throwing rats in the next crate. "The crate is opened and the rats escape. Then they began their terrible work. Plague on board. His Majesty's Navy destroyed without an enemy warship in sight." The Viren walked quickly, putting rats in each and every one of the crates of ship's biscuit. When the work was done, he paused, picking up the sack. "It seems I have some left over," he sniggered. "I may as well let them go." He held open the sack. "Go, go, my pretty ones." Nina held her breath. Every fibre in her body was telling her to run, yet she couldn't move. From the sack, a great tide of rats surged into the room. "There's no way the time runners would be able to stop this one," the Viren cackled. He stared at Nina. "I will not destroy your mind this time. Instead, I want you to go and tell Mortlock. Tell him it is the Viren's turn now." At that, he left. For a few minutes, neither Nina or Nadim could move. Rats scrabbled up the walls and over everything. It was only the smell of smoke that brought Nina to her senses. In the scrabble, a rat had knocked over the candle. It fell into a basket of dry kindling and wood savings, which burst into the flame. Nina grabbed Nadim. "We have to get out of here now!" Nina and Nadim staggered into the lane. Within seconds, the bakery was an angry storm of fire and swirling smoke. The whole building seemed to scream as ancient wood beams burst into flame. Above the noise, Nina could hear voices. It was the baker, Thomas, and his family. They were climbing out of a top window to safety. Nadim, still dazed by the Viren, looked up at them. "Fly away home," he muttered. He sounded like a little boy. "House is on fire and all is gone." "Come on, Nadim," said Nina. "We need to clear our heads." Chapter 6. The fire in Pudding Lane quickly took hold. The timber houses with their dry, thin walls were no match for the flames. The buildings were so cramped together that the fire spread easily in every direction. As the fire spread through the streets, the people of London began to panic. Some fled, dragging their possessions with them. Others stayed and tried to fight the fire, but leather buckets filled with waste water could make little difference. Many people were faced with a stark choice: let their homes burn or tear them down using fire hooks. Their hope was to break the fire's progress by making gaps in the tightly packed maze of lanes and alleys. Such drastic actions might save the city, but it was such a tough decision that most people hesitated until it was too late. Chapter 7. To make matters worse, a strong wind served to fan the flames farther. Showers of sparks drifted widely over the city. Very soon, fires were breaking out everywhere. Nadim and Nina were escaping from the fire when Tyler's download arrived. Download from Tyler. "Great news! The thermometer settled down. I was trying to sort it without much luck, and then all of a sudden it just went back to normal." "I bet that was when the fire started. History's back on track," said Nina. "Great," said Nadim. "A city is on fire and we're meant to be Great, said Nadim. "A city's on fire and we're meant to feel good about it." "Look on the bright side," said Nina. "At least the Viren's plan is finished. Unless the plague rats flee the fires like everyone else," added Nadim. Nina looked at the huge orange glow over the city. "But where would the rats flee to?" she said. Thousands of flakes of ash was falling from the sky like strange snow. A voice in the distance cried, "It's the end of the world!" They watched as men rushed past, carrying buckets of water from the river. "The river," said Nadim. "That has to be the safest place right now. Let's go." The river was in chaos. The fire had destroyed everything in its path, and now it threatened London Bridge. People, animals, rats all streamed towards the river's edge. Now the only escape from the flames was to jump into the muddy water itself. Downstream, the Navy ships hadn't steered. They were unable to help. The tide was too low. Only one dark figure stood waiting and watching. It was the Byron. From every gully and drain, rats scurried from the advancing fire. Among them stood the Byron. Every now and then he bent down and scooped one up. It was as if he was choosing the ones he wanted. The ones carrying plague, perhaps? Suddenly a flash of blue flame filled the air around the Byron. The flame hadn't come from the great fire. It had come from Nadim's trap, but he'd missed. The Byron grinned. He turned and ran through the fire that now licked around the start of the bridge. "We have to stop him!" shouted Nadim. Grabbing hold of Nina's hand, he plunged into the smoke and flame after the Byron. Beyond this point, the bridge was still safe but strangely deserted. At the far end was a gatehouse. The Byron ran towards it, but the gates were closed. The Byron was trapped. Thinking fast, the Byron spun round and smashed his way into the nearest building on the bridge, a flour mill. Inside the mill was a mass of machinery, giant cogs, wheels, and shafts, lit by glares of 1,000 fires. It cast strange patterns of shadow and light all around. Being of darkness, the Byron slipped easily into the shadows. It was hard for Nadim and Nina to adjust their eyes to the gloom. All was still. "I can't see him," hissed Nadim. With the background roar of the great fire, they'd never hear him either. In a deadly game of cat and mouse, the Byron moved from one shadow to another around them. "I'm scared," said Nina. "Shh," whispered Nadim. "Stay absolutely still." He had an idea. Nina gripped his trap. At Nadim's feet were stacks of flour. Slowly he bent down and grabbed 2 large handfuls. He threw them as hard as he could in a high arc across the room. A fine dust filled the air and hung like a strange mist all around. "Watch for any movement in the dust," Nadim whispered. Then to one side the dust rippled. The air had been disturbed. The Byron had moved. "Duck!" whispered Nina to Nadim as she launched her zap trap. The blue zap reached out towards the Byron. It burst into raw energy. For a fraction of a second, the whole space was lit up as millions of particles of flour dust ignited. The zap trap fell to the floor, empty, but the Byron was gone. "We've used both the zap traps," said Nina. "We'll have to head back to the time vault." Meanwhile, somewhere down on the river, a small whirlwind of sparks spun over the water. The Byron began to take form again. So that's the end of this channel. I hope you enjoyed my readings of it, and if you did, please click many likes and subscribe Reading Club. So I'll come back later with a new and improved channel. Bye everybody, see you later!